Subscribe to our YouTube channel for in-depth interviews of India Inc. and press the bell icon so that you do not miss our updates.
Hello and welcome to Nirmal, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Hiral Dadia. We have with us Mr. R. Gandhi, former RBI Deputy Governor. It's a pleasure to have you, Mr. Gandhi, and a very warm welcome to the show. My first question coming to you is, all of this while, we've been wondering as to the impact that COVID has left behind so far with regards to different economies right now, different businesses, and no one has been spared. However, in the last 1 month to 45 days, we are seeing some bit of green shoots that are coming in with regards to at least with the Indian economy is concerned, in spite of all the challenges. Do you think this is a mechanical rebound that we are seeing?
First of all, thank you for asking me to share my views. Yes, the COVID has been unprecedented throughout the world, including in India. So its impact when we are trying to get over with appropriate facing of the lockdown getting relaxed. So naturally the question comes up whether whatever green shoot which we are seeing, whether it is sustainable one or it is just a correction of the pent up demand and kind of. So that's what effectively you are asking. But I would believe that it is a sustainable one because people having faced the lockdown for almost now 6 months, both people and business are definitely that a normal animal spirit of wanting to grow will always be there. So every opportunity that is coming along, businesses and people will grab it with both hands and will look forward for increasing their productivity, income, and employment. So that way, the positive approach which a normal human being will have, that will certainly come to the fore. It is not a deject by the total dejection like a war or whatever kind of that where you had much more severe psychological impact. Here, everyone clearly understood that this is something much beyond human capacity to deal in. So the science has not yet found the full answer for it. So that is why when an opportunity is offered, I would believe that the natural instinct of a human being will come forth to carry it forward in terms of creating growth and income.
Absolutely. What you're saying is absolutely pretty much on the right track. However, from here on, we already know the RBI has been forthcoming with the kind of actions that they've taken initially. I mean, I don't think so anyone really expected a 115 basis point rate cut. However, with this, if you go to see, we are not seeing any major outcome with regards to where transmission goes. Now, if you have to take into consideration what the RBI has done, if you have to take into consideration the stimulus package that the government announced, which is more of a credit stimulus than a financial stimulus, do you think further stimulus needs to be announced by the government? And if yes, what should be the focus for economic revival?
See, in finance, interest rate is not the only consideration one should have. As a central bank, yes, Reserve Bank has already taken several steps towards reducing the rate. But that is not a sufficient one because when I say not a sufficient one, I'm not meaning that further cuts are required. And I think that it has to have other supporting measures also, which Reserve Bank has done. It just not just reduce the rates, it also increase the liquidity like anything. Almost more than 8 lakh crores of rupees have been created by the Reserve Bank itself. In addition, the government's economic package also, major part, almost 80% of the financial package announced by the government, it is actually a kind of credit flow only. It is not by fiscal proper. Fiscal proper is hardly the remaining 20%. So that way, the dependency on credit system and the liquidity that has been created by the Reserve Bank and also the rate cuts which have come along with all these packages. We have to see it as a total package rather than only looking at the interest rate cut and whether that has been passed on, transmission has taken place or not. That is not immediate, because the point is that for credit to be picking up, there has to be people wanting to come out with projects, financeable projects, and they should seek credit from the banks and debt from the market. So that has not yet come. So until that, it is not that just because interest rate has not further come down, they are hesitating to come. No, that's not the issue. Normally, monetary policy effectiveness at the trough of a business cycle will be not that very effective, like a fiscal package. That's why around this point in time, the more emphasis or more weightage should be for fiscal measures rather than monetary measures. Monetary measures should be supportive. That's what the Reserve Bank has done. It has said that liquidity will continue to be available. It will be in accommodative stage that will continue, and there is room for further rate cuts. All those kind of supporting environment has been created by the monetary policy authority, and now the lead will have to be from the fiscal side. So that is what we should be looking forward when the private investment decisions are not yet forthcoming. Private capital formation is not happening for several quarters, and post-COVID it is further negative only. So that is where the filling up will have to be from the fiscal. From the fiscal side, great efforts and large ambitious projects will have to be announced. Just I was reading before this thing started, Reserve Bank has come out with its annual report, just released this morning. There is several suggestions given in this report on looking forward. What are the kind of fiscal projects and schemes that can be announced? They are talking about the national infrastructure pipeline that will certainly will be bringing forth the investment opportunities, and that way crowding in private investment also, because government has should monetize several of its assets in infrastructure sector, like whether it is steel, coal, ports, airports, and railways. Privatization, when it comes, then it will lead to private investment coming up also, and that will lead to increase in credit demand. So that way, going forward, the greater thrust will have to be coming from, initiative will have to be coming from the government segment, that fiscal segment.
Right. So with this, at this juncture, there's a strong argument, Mr. Gandhi, with regards to look past the current spurt in inflation and test the limits of both conventional as well as the unconventional monetary policy. Now, what is your sense you have on this front? Do you think inflation numbers at this current point should be ignored if you have to take revival into consideration? Or do you think inflation needs to be kept into consideration whilst the revival is on? I mean, how do you balance that?
See, the statutory responsibility assigned on the Monetary Policy Committee is inflation targeting within the bounds which have been prescribed. It is a law. So naturally, Reserve Bank and the Monetary Policy Committee will have their prime first duty will be to have a clear eye on the emerging inflation trajectory. Yes, it is not that just because in one quarter or one inflation number has crossed the upper limit, then automatically they have to reverse. And it is clearly not on that basis. They'll be looking forward based on their analysis. What is the likely inflation scenario emerging in the next 3 months to 6 months to 1 year? That's a typical projection. The Reserve Bank and the Monetary Policy Committee will apply their mind. And if they would foresee a consistent uptrend in the inflation in the foreseeable period, in the short period of 3 months to 1 year, then definitely they will be taking action to control it, because that is their duty to do that. So by that, as I said, that just because in the last number, inflation number has crossed a little higher level, we need not automatically believe or tend to think that monetary policy is going to be tightened. Definitely no. So it has, they themselves have projected that down the line, the H2 of the current fiscal, the inflation will be easing out. So they are saying that the current blip is only as a kind of exception which can be handled, but naturally they will be watching out for further indication that will be coming along, like the international oil prices, which were really at the bottom level for several months earlier, but in the last by several weeks it has trudged up, but still it is still cheaper only. But if it is likely to be increasing further, then we have a problem. They say clearly that will be inflationary for Indian economy. So that's why the Bank and the Monetary Policy Committee will be looking closely. They have decided about a pause in the recent committee meeting. That is because of these kind of developments. In any case, they will continue to be looking at. It is not that just because they are emphasizing more on inflation targeting, that doesn't mean automatically mean that they are not worried about the current economic growth and prospects, because their primary duty, again I am emphasizing, their primary duty is inflation targeting. And if they would foresee persistence of inflation, then naturally they'll have to be taking rate-related actions.
Right. And with this, what's the sense that you have with regards to the recovery? If you have to look at the GDP side of it, because when we look at it right now, at least in the first quarter, 16 to 17% decline is what we're expecting. If we look at FY21 as a year, an expectation overall on a consensus around a 7 to 8% decline. However, one of our analysts has done a research as well with regards to that the years after Spanish flu witnessed a decline in real GDP as well as per capita and population as well. Now, if you have to look at that, do you think that interest rates may continue to stay, lower for longer, where inflation will not be a threat? And secondly, the recovery could be a W-shaped recovery that we could see from here on.
Okay. Spanish flu was 100 years before, so we of course certain learnings we can definitely get from there, but that does not automatically likely to be replicated in today's circumstances, when the world is completely in a totally different environment today, more open, and the tools, technology available for dealing with problems are also different today. So to that extent, it is not just a replication of the previous the pandemic related problem. That is unlikely, because we have definitely, that's what it is. A human being will definitely learn from the earlier experience. To that extent, a reference to looking at back to the last century's problem is okay. Now, yes, the growth prospects that we have a very strong silver lining in terms of agriculture and rural sector. So that is going to be a very big fillip for making the V-shaped recovery rather than the W. That's another thing which people talk about, because W can happen if there is a big relapse on the COVID. That's what OECD has assumed, that that could be a relapse of COVID again after recovering a bit. Again, it can happen. So that is assumption they have made. But hopefully, the way the science has progressed and the vaccines are being tested, so we should not be facing that kind of situation. So we will be rather we'll be hoping for V-shaped recovery, which will be led by the agriculture. Agriculture, yes, agriculture contribution to the total GDP all along in the recent several decades, it had been coming down, and it is as of now only 15% of the total GDP, its contribution. But the greatest positive point about is that it is not the size of the GDP contribution from agriculture. It is the sentiment, number one. And number two, the number of people whose income will be at a higher level will be more. Because agriculture, even today, contributes, supports 60% of the country's population. So even if we have small growth in agriculture, it means that it is distributed across large population. So large population is going to get increase in income. That would mean the sentiments will be positive. The negative sentiment because of the effect of losing job or losing business, which is associated with the industrial and service sector, the number of people affected in those segments is much less compared to the agriculture, where we will be seeing positive income growth. So that is what is going to be helping us in getting strong V-shaped recovery. And the rural economy, when the income increases in the rural economy, it has always led, our past experience clearly shows that it increases the consumption demand of the country as a whole. So that would mean that there will be good tailwinds for the industrial growth in the economy. Yes, service sector will be affected. Service sector still have a problem, deep problem in terms of tourism, transport, entertainment, and kind of things that will have to be naturally throughout this fiscal. We have to kind of forget that they will have a good growth. It is unlikely, but the rest of the segments should be able to show very good positive impact.
Absolutely. And, I mean, the trend when I talk to corporates as well, that's what I've been picking up, where the rural demand has been so strong, the recovery has been so strong, which they never anticipated. Like, they've seen growth on a year-on-year basis, which was absolutely, they've like almost reached 100% production capacity. So that's something which is a positive on the consumption side. Another point, Mr. Gandhi, that you mentioned was with regards to financing the fiscal deficit. What is the way that we would finance, how we would be able to finance the fiscal deficit? Do you think that the RBI should go ahead and buy government bonds then?
See, fiscal deficit, it is not that when fiscal deficit increases, it doesn't mean that only it has to be monetized by the central bank. That is not, because so long as the market is able to lend money to the government, that is the other than central bank or picking up the government bonds, then absolutely there is no need for monetization. Look at now in the current scenario. The another thing which has happened in this post-COVID period in the financial sector is that the banks are awash with deposit growth. Deposit growth has been very, very strong in this since March. Since March of this year, as of now, there is 6 lakh crores of additional deposit growth has been seen in absolute term. In addition, this 6 lakh crores, and actually the credit during this 6 months period or 5 months period, credit has actually been negative. It has about 1.5 lakh crores, it has actually come down during this period. Where does this 6 lakh crores the bank have utilized? All have gone as investment in government securities. That is also the GFD only. Okay. That is meeting the fiscal deficit of the government. The market is funding it, not the Reserve Bank. So long as there is no private, there is no demand, uptake in the credit demand by the private sector, banks will be able to utilize their liquid funds, whichever they have got it through deposits or otherwise, and utilize that as a funding for the government. So which is taking place. It is also okay. It is nothing wrong about it. When private credit is not picking up, banks can utilize their resources to be lending to the government. So today, the government is borrowing. Government borrowing, so long as private sector is able to meet that demand, the central bank need not necessarily be funding. So going forward also, if the government would come out with further fiscal measures which will require additional funds for the government will first try to tap it through the primary market only, I mean from the market. So
Right.
only if the market is failing to meet the requirement, that is the time we have to think about whether Reserve Bank can participate in the primary issuance of the government or not. That's a far cry, in my opinion.
Right.
Yes.
So, Mr. Gandhi, on the fiscal side, what is the kind of extent of measures you think should be taken to aid the current scenario? And if it is large, probably what will RBI's role be in terms of managing the consequent borrowings are concerned?
Okay. First, of course, when the fiscal measures are going to be announced, it has to be a variety of both supporting the consumption and supporting the infrastructure building up. Both capital expenditure should also be there, and consumption should also be there. Because in the current scenario, in the current year, when the private consumption has been severely dented, that would mean that government should be supporting more and more towards increasing the consumption. That's an immediate need. Because the current period, the first priority should be to enhance the consumption needs of the economy. That should be the priority. And that is where government should leave more money in the hands of the people who can spend. That yes, earlier the announcement had been in favor of the farmers, in favor of the destitutes, in favor of the migrant laborers. So those kind of things have already been done. And now the government should come out with a specific transfer of funds for those services, the people who lost their income because the services segment in which they are in, like in the tourism or entertainment or those kind of hotels, restaurants, kind of businesses, they all lost their money. So they lost business for them. So there need to be specific transfer, the direct benefit transfer for this particular segment, which will lead to consumption, because they will all be using that money only. So that is a consumption. That is one part of the fiscal package. We'll have to address, specifically focus, supporting this particular segment of people who lost income and job. That is number one. Number two, yes, government should not stop there. They should always, whenever fiscal expenditure is done, a greater portion should be towards increasing the infrastructure. So there again, the government in the fiscal package itself had announced several measures, but corresponding money for supporting that has not yet been announced. The policy announcement they made, but the supporting the financial package has not yet come. So that will be a good area to spend, whether it is for space, defense, or privatization of the various infrastructure projects, or even announcing government itself implementing infrastructure projects in terms of roads and other kind of projects. So that way, there will be there should be a good mix of capital expenditure and also consumption expenditure by the government. That's what should be there. And how, where is the role of the Reserve Bank would come? Obviously, in the Reserve Bank is the debt manager for the public debt manager for the government. So it should see to it that the market finances this additional requirement of the government needs, rather than it is devolving on the Reserve Bank and monetizing it. So the Reserve Bank's first role will be to see that public borrowing program, whatever is the increased amount which will be announced by the government, that should be it should be easy for the market to finance. So that should be its first priority. And of course, the long-term impact of such an increase in government debt, appropriately sequencing it in terms of the tenor of the borrowing, and not disturb, and seeing to it that it is a sustainable way of repayment. That also it has to factor in. So that will be the role of the Reserve Bank.
Right. And then with this, right now we've highlighted as to where the government really needs to spend as well. However, on the expenditure side, there will be few places where the government will have to go ahead and look at curtailing the expense as well from a revival perspective. So which areas do you think that the government should actually curtail the expense to, to somehow maintain the fisc?
See, I don't think in the right now is the time for economizing or looking at whether wasteful expenditure kind of approach. Because as of now, the only engine out of the four engines which support economic growth, that is consumption, investment, net export, and government spending. Only the government's engine is actually functional. Consumption, it has not yet picked up. Investment has been in the doldrum for several quarters, and the external sector has not yet become really, even though last quarter we did have a positive trade surplus, but that is a blip. I mean, but that's a small measure, but it's not a sustained one. So until the other out of the other three, at least one or two gets momentum, it is a government spending which has to be supporting the growth engine of the economy. So that would mean that at this point in time, if we look at this is a wasteful expenditure by the government, this is a good expenditure, that is unnecessary debate which we need not necessarily have. That's my opinion.
Right. And overall, we did touch a point as to on the infrastructure development that needs to take place as well. And I think that has to happen more on the rural side, because right now, if we go to see, the remittances with regards to rural India have been impacted. Now, do you think agriculture as a sector will be able to offset that impact? How do you see that movement? Because a lot of money that goes from urban to rural, and that's what was supporting rural growth as well. Over there, we have seen some bit of a stop that's coming right now.
See, absorptive capacity of the rural sector for large investment is not there. That kind of by the way we talk about in lakhs of crores of investment opportunities, they are not there in rural sector. So the entire approach cannot be aimed only at creating infrastructure at the rural sector. So the rural sector will have to be there, because that in any case they are as of now have positive growth. So to support that that momentum, to keep up that momentum, we should be concentrating in terms of preservation of the food materials and other thing, where the supply chain mechanism in terms of godowns, preservation capacity, food processing capacity, those kind of infrastructure we have to definitely look at, including the rural roads and the rural communication. That's right, but that is not going to be absorbing large investment which a country requires and which the government should be doing. So that is why the concentration of the public expenditure in terms of infrastructure will be more towards the non-rural type of investment.
Right. And overall, we spoke about the credit growth as well. Now, clearly, we said that 115 basis points rate cut is what we've seen. However, the credit offtake has remained sluggish, almost at around 6%. What is your outlook with regards to credit growth? Because there is risk averseness which is prevalent in the system, and that's one of the reasons why we're not seeing that bank credit that's picking up. How do we solve this issue?
Yeah, we say whenever there's a trade cycle, and in the trade cycle we are at the low end. In the normal days also, at the low end there will be less interest from the entrepreneurs to be coming forward with the projects for expansion of its capacity, or new projects, new areas, and other thing. That will be the normal. So the demand for credit will be low only. So that is, but there is nothing, and on top of it, because of the COVID, when there had been no business activity at all, so naturally the businesses will not be able to look forward to and is on that expectation, try to borrow money and continue their activity. That is not there. So as of now, the installed capacity in terms of the various segments of the economy, unutilized capacity is still there. When the demand is low, when there is no pickup, that would mean that without increasing capital expenditure, they will be able to increase their production. So what they would normally would need it that they have a working capital requirements for which the already limits are there, which so that is unlikely to be creating big additional credit demand. Even when the lockdown is completely gone and all activity has been permitted, at that time also we'll not be able to see immediately very big credit demand coming up, because existing limits should be, now the working capital limits normally will be sufficient for every businesses to carry on. So a big credit demand will come only when they reach near about full capacity utilization, or anything more than 80% of the capacity utilization. That's the time the entrepreneurs will look around for expanding their capacity, by installing new machinery, new factories kind of, or new projects, or they will be enthusiastic enough to diversify their businesses into further activity. That kind of momentum will come much later. So that's why the credit demand in the current fiscal is unlikely to be very strong. It will be muted only. That is where the to compensate that public investment, public expenditure should be there.
Exactly. So that's something which we will have to keep our eyes on. And secondly, if you think about the RBI, as beginning March itself, they've announced several measures to help COVID hit economy. Now, it included a 6-month moratorium on loans. There was a one-time loan restructuring, on the back of loans that were impacted by COVID. Now, taking all of this into consideration, if you read RBI's annual report, which they've released as well, is clearly indicating that all of this may impact the health of the banks. What do you make out of this? Because clearly, RBI, when they released their July 2020 financial stability report, they've clearly said that the NPAs may surge almost 1.5 times above their probably March 2020 levels. And this is like baseline scenario, and almost 1.7 times in a very severely stressed scenario. They're expecting the system level CRAR to drop to almost 13.3% in March 21. Now, with these numbers, when the annual report is saying that it could impact banks, and if you have to match it with the financial stability report, do you think it matches, or do you think there is a possibility where the stress could increase on the asset quality as well?
Okay, so the analysis done by the FSR, which are projected that possibly in the coming quarters, the NPA could be more. That is one aspect thereof. But there is, I am looking at certain data right now. We are not getting clear answers for the queries that I have. For example, during this period, the credit outstanding has come down across the board of every type of loans and advances. It is not just a small, medium, micro, large, any and every type of industrial loans and advances. Data shows clearly it has come down. And in the private segment also, both in the retail and in the services type of loans also, you look at Reserve Bank data, every sub-segment, the credit has actually come down. How the credit can come down, outstanding has come down. That would mean that people have paid back. People and businesses have paid back their outstanding. Number one. Number two, as I said, that 6 lakhs additional deposits have been, deposit growth in the banking system as a whole has been 6 lakh crores. 1.5 lakh crores of credit has been paid off. 6 lakh additional deposits have come. In addition, people have withdrawn 2.5 lakh crores of additional cash currency increase. So altogether, 10 lakh crores of surplus has been seen in the hands of the public and the businesses during this 5 months period. from where the money
Mm.
has come. That means that among the population, among the businesses, there is sizable portion of population and businesses have got robust income flow or cash flow during this period. So this that is why there is a surplus in terms of deposit growth. That is why there is a reduction in the outstanding of the credit, and that is why there is a withdrawal of cash together. So that means that economic activity is there robustly in part of the economy. So this part of the economy is not going to be defaulting. This part of the borrowers definitely or will be continuously be paying off their dues. So the moratorium, despite moratorium announced, these people have not actually utilized the moratorium. That's why the outstanding has come down, because they have paid back their whatever is due. So that is clear that there is another segment which is really affected, which is what everybody, entire limelight is on those people who have actually lost income and businesses. And we are looking at their problem and seeing that and trying to extrapolate that the entire economy is affected. Like, no. One segment of the population is affected, another segment of the population has been thriving. That would mean that the impact of NPA or stress, which is likely to be there, is not the way we are all presuming to be. In my opinion, it should be possible for us to have it within the controllable limits, the NPA that should be coming up, because of these other factors which I talked about.
Right. In fact, when I talk to a lot of sectors, Mr. Gandhi, with regards to on the consumption side, you say consumer discretionary, durables, or even staples, they are of the view that their cash flow cycle is at a multi-quarter high right now. And that's actually proving the point of what you're saying, that the money flow in the system is really good. And majority of these corporates, to be noted, is they want to in this year go ahead and repay a lot of debt as well, because that's the surplus that they are sitting on. So that's a very valid point that you've made, and it actually matches with what's happening in corporate India as well. And with this, another thing what I've been noticing right now is that a lot of funds are being raised by the private banks right now already. The quantum of money that they have been raising is left, right, center. Do you think then it becomes key even for the PSUs to be recapitalized? Is that the key from here on in probably the backdrop for likely asset quality pressure that we could see?
Yeah, the Reserve Bank has been emphasizing with all the banks, including the public banks, that this is a time you should be shoring up your capital. That there is the stress which, if it continues in the system, then it can affect the financials of the banks. So it is better to be more careful and upfront to take preventive action, rather than after the stress has materialized and then you go for and we're trying to find additional capital. At that time, because of the negative sentiments about the actual position, the investors may not be forthcoming to fund you. At least now, when the market is there and people are awash with surplus, so surplus money is available in the hands of the investors and savers, and you should be able to shore up your capital. In the long term, it will be good for you. So that is a suggestion which seems to have gone across to the banks. And obviously, the private sector banks, because they can take independent and quick decisions, they have already come to the market and started raising it. Whereas public sector banks still are languishing in terms of coming out with in a strong manner to mop up additional capital. Because capital will always be needed, not just for meeting the stress which is likely to build up or which can build up, but in the normal course, even for growth also, you need additional capital. So for both from positive and positive perspective, you should be raising additional capital.
Right. And overall with this, what is your view with regards to where the forex reserves are concerned? We are at record forex levels. Do you think that the RBI should add more?
See, Forex Reserve, it is not based on any target. The Reserve Bank has consistently maintained by several decades that Forex Reserve, it is not having any target. It is a resultant of its Forex operations in the market, Forex policy, in the sense that to remove the fluctuations and the volatility in the day-to-day market operations. So whenever there is additional surplus funds coming in the market, Reserve Bank absorbs it so that the rupee appreciation is not very unmanageable one. Or when there is a heavy demand and the rupee is losing, depreciation is happening, at that time again to smoothen the volatility, it supplies the market. So the resultant figure is the accretion or depletion of the reserves. Over the period, because of the continuous economic reforms that Reserve Bank has, the country has done, and the foreign interest in India in terms of FDI flow and FPI flow, for almost every year since 1991, we have been seeing almost except one or two occasions, we had ended up with accruing reserves additionally. So that is a resultant policy effect rather than targeted policy effect. So that's why, even if we conclude that this 500 crores is sufficient, for that reason, Reserve Bank should not intervene in the market for purchasing dollars when the rupees are appreciating and destabilizing volatility. Obviously, no. It has to still intervene in the market to stabilize them.
Absolutely. I think great points that you've made, Mr. Gandhi, a lot of clarity that emerges out of this conversation as well. Thank you so much for joining us as well. And I think, I'm sure everyone's enjoyed the conversation as well. I hope you enjoyed the conversation with us as well. And we should see you soon once again, once things improve, to understand how the improvement has been from here on, because everything is just waiting to hear positives and ignore all the negatives that have emerged so far. So there is some upgrowth. There is some uptrend that comes in from here on. But thank you so much, Mr. Gandhi, for joining in, and stay safe.
Thank you. Bye.